guys, Christopher McSweeney here.
Tim Shabanowitz here.
And we are going to go through Lesson 1, Elements and Principles. So what we want you to do first is let's read this quote. The principal goal of education is to create men who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. Men who are creative, inventive, and discoverers. This is from Jean Piaget. He's an educational psychologist. And what we want you to do here is just pause for 30 seconds and just react to this quote. How does it make you feel? And things like that. So go ahead and pause. All right, and we're going to get right back into it with elements of art. We have 7 principles. These seem pretty simple. I think maybe just a couple need explanations. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah. So again, the whole point of today's lesson is to talk about elements of art, which are here. These are the 7 here. And basically think of these as things that you draw on paper to make a real life object come to life. So some of these are easy: line, color, texture, all pretty self-explanatory. Form and shape are a little bit different. Form is basically a 3D representation of a 2D shape. So think squares are shapes, cubes are forms, circles are shapes, spheres are forms.
That sounds pretty easy.
That's pretty easy now once you think about that. Space, I just want to bring up there. Space could be things that you're putting into places like positive space, but you also got to really think about the negative space of a room or of a space that you're dealing with, because that's where people inhabit, that's where people go and circulate. So think about the positive and the negative space.
I like that. I like that. So what would be a really interesting thing and challenge for anybody participating in DIY design would to use this space, the dotted lines, and try to draw these different elements of art, right? So draw some lines, add some color in there, make a form versus a shape, and just start trying to sketch a little bit. Yeah,
for sure. And just to finish it off, value, if that is basically how light or how dark something is. So you can start doing some lighter sketch lines versus some darker sketch lines to get on there. So you can kind of play with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, pretty straightforward if you are just going on the basic route. Nothing really that we need to dig super deep into. But you can start looking all over the place. Like we have lines and different colors around this room and stuff like that too. All right?
Yeah.
Easy. Let's move on to elements of structures. We have 2 distinct categories here. We have straight and curved. Yeah. Let's go ahead. Some of this is architectural in nature, but also we see it in anywhere.
Yeah, right? pretty much. And so with this, elements of structures, if elements of art are what you draw on paper, the elements of structures are what, if you had to build this in the real world, these are the basic building blocks to make everything in the world. You can kind of dumb it down to these. On the left side we have the straight side, and these are dealing with things that are pretty simple. A column and beam. Column is a vertical structure, and a beam is a horizontal structure.
And usually beams sit on columns.
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. And these are important because when you're building structures really up high, or whether there's furniture or building the Eiffel Tower, all that weight that's up there needs to get to the ground. And the most efficient way to get there is by a straight column going down. Okay?
Makes sense. And so we know what those are. Those are pretty, universal. I've seen those in the Parthenon and stuff like that. And then we have this cantilever. Yeah. What is that about?
Fancy word for an overhang. So if you have a beam and a column that's supporting a beam, which it would be my hand right here, this part where my fingers are not supported by anything. That's a cantilever.
Gotcha.
Okay? Easy.
That is pretty easy. And then, so what do we got here with a truss?
Truss. So
would this be easier to see a picture?
Yeah, I think so. Let's go show that. So for a truss, this is an example of a truss you might have seen before. Many bridges are built that way. So you would need structures that are really big just to support all that weight, but it's not really an efficient way to build a structure. So basically, a truss is a beam with holes in it. And so that's what we have there.
Nice. Let's talk about these curved aspects, because those are really interesting, much harder to build, especially for a course like DIY design where you're just getting started. But should we run through the difference between these, because they seem similar?
Similar, yeah. And arch and dome are pretty easy. Just think of like arch is going from like a 1D structure and going to dome, which is a 3D structure. Here's an example of an arch. Think about the St. Louis arch, or just one of those singular arches right there, or structures right there. But as soon as you start to make an arch more 3D, like this,
there we go.
That's when you start getting to a vault. This is a specific type of vault called a barrel vault, and it's basically a string of arches all together. You can see that one piece of metal that's over there, that would be considered an arch, and then the whole tunnel is a vault. If you go to the next one, you can see up to the top there's a different type of way that the arches are coming together. If you go to the next slide, you can see a better example. One barrel vault's coming from the left and right, and one barrel vault's coming from the north-south. This would be called a groin vault. We also have other types of vaults that if you have it fanned out at the top of a column, can you guess what kind of vault that would be?
That's a fan vault?
Yes, it is. There's
on.
lots of different types of vaults. It's just big ways to use curves to support structures.
Okay.
And then obviously we get to a dome, which is basically a arch that has been revolved 360 degrees around its center point.
Nice.
You've all seen domes before, but I think you get the point.
And we have an image right here.
There.
Okay. Which we'll get back to Taj Mahal in just a minute,
Yeah.
but just to kind of go through that continuum. And all of these are just ways of making structures, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And now this is where it gets like the rubber's meeting the road here as we start looking at DIY design, the principles of design. We're going to take the art and structure, and we're going to kind of mold it in. And as we go through this course, we're going to kind of dig more deeply into each one of these things. But what would you like everybody to know kind of about rhythm and balance and emphasis and all of these things?
Yeah. All these principles, the more principles that a design has, the better it's going to be, the better the design, right? So if you're only focusing on, say, one of these, or can only identify one thing, you're not thinking too deeply, or the design isn't that good. So try to encompass as many things as you can. Rhythm is pretty simple when you're just repeating things. Balance, you might think, is more like a formal balance, like left side equals the right side or top equals bottom. But you can have asymmetrical balance as well, where you have like a really tall, slender thing on one side and a fat, squatty thing on the other side. But since they kind of feel the same weight-wise, it's okay. You feel balanced. You can kind of think of it like maybe like a chaise lounge on one side, and then an end table on the other side of a couch. It's not formal, but it's balanced.
And what's interesting is that will also drive people to use that room or space or object in a different way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So that could be really interesting. I hear what you're saying about if one of these is too much, then the whole design will kind of like if all you have is emphasis.
Yeah.
You'll have no balance, right?
Exactly.
There won't be any unity or movement. You'll just be, emphasizing one thing.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. I think a lot of these are pretty self-explanatory, with emphasis being just focusing on one thing. Proportion and scale could be different sizes of the same thing, or modularity, which we'll get into later on these lessons. Movement is basically just seeing if objects kind of make you feel like you're moving.
That's my favorite one.
Yeah.
I love playing with movement. Because especially in a classroom, like in my classroom, it's very dynamic. Having movement, facilitating the movement of my students is super helpful. And also, if you are just sitting there, it does keep you engaged with the design because your eyes are constantly traveling around.
Exactly, but not so distracting that you can't do your work. It's all there. And then contrast, just kind of with the value, light and dark, how dark or light something is, or how visually heavy or light something is. But unity is probably the hardest one to kind of get around, because unity just means that it just works. It's hard to describe, but everything works. Everything goes together. And that's why bringing up like the Taj Mahal, as we had before, is kind of a good example of showing all these principles in effect.
Good. What would be a great kind of pausing point? Because we just went over all these design, structures, art, all these different things. What would be really great for everybody is to take this space in the book.
Yep.
And using as much vocabulary as possible, right? And ideas, is then to go back and take a look at this picture of the Taj Mahal.
Yep.
And break this down on that space in the book, right?
What do you see here? What are the things you can identify? Take a couple minutes for sure.
Yeah, take a few minutes just to pause the video right here, and then come back, and we're going to talk about the upcoming activity. Awesome. So that was a ton of information. Some of it we kind of know because we've just seen design and structures everywhere we go. Maybe we start becoming aware of it. What we want to look at is this first assignment. We want you to kind of reflect back on that first quote, right? Yeah. Of being creative, inventive, discoverers. And a lot of this first initial assignment is going to be the discovering piece. And so we want you to describe a room using all this new language. So we did it with the Taj Mahal, right? But now let's get personal and start looking at your space that you're in, that you want to redesign, okay? Whether that is one part of the room, or if it's the entire room, or if it's a hallway, right?
Right.
Use all the language that we've gone over and try to be as detailed as possible, right?
You're just trying to become familiar with this vocabulary, because when you eventually get to talk with your client and you're trying to deal with new designs, you want to be talking on the same wavelength. You want to be talking intelligently, but talking so that other designers can understand what you're talking about. And the more you practice using this stuff, whether writing it down or identifying them or talking about them, the more fluent it will be in your speech, and you can do better at explaining things.
Totally. What you want to do to end out this first assignment is to look at what you've written about your space, and then reflect back on our quote and see if the space is currently supporting what you want it to support. Okay. And if it's not, then that's where we're going to start really getting into this to redesign it to make sure that we are supporting the principal goal of education. So anyway, we hope this video helps, and good luck.